You were faithful for decades. You loved one person, honored your marriage, and now you're alone. But your body didn't turn off. And that thought, it can feel wrong, even sinful, before God. Is it a sin to still feel desire after becoming a widow or widower? Or could it be that what you're feeling is not what you think it is? Stay with me until the end, because today you'll understand what the Bible really says about this and how to deal with these feelings without guilt and without drifting away from God. If you are over 65, lived a long marriage, and today find yourself a widower or widow, perhaps this question has arisen silently in your heart, just by feeling desire. Am I already sinning against God? It is a sincere doubt and often laden with guilt. Because you were faithful for decades, you honored your covenant, you built a clean history before God, and now, the mere fact of still feeling something inside you may seem wrong, as if it were a spiritual failure or even a lack of respect for the one who has departed. But before any conclusion, there is a biblical truth that needs to be made very clear in your heart. Feeling is not the same as sinning. In James 1 verse 14, it is written, "But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin." Do you see the process? First comes the impulse, the feeling, the inclination. But sin does not happen in that first moment. It begins when this is fed, when it gains space, when it becomes a choice. Even Jesus was tempted, as Hebrews 4 verse 15 says, but without sin. This shows us something very important. The presence of a desire does not define your faithfulness to God. And perhaps no one has explained this to you in this way, and that is why you carried an unnecessary weight, thinking that just by feeling, you were already displeasing the Lord. But God knows your story, your pain, your loss, and also your body. He is not looking at you with condemnation for something that is part of your human nature. Now, this does not mean that everything is permitted, and it is exactly here that many become confused at this stage of life. So tell me, if feeling is not a sin, at what moment does this start to become a problem before God? Because this answer can completely change the way you deal with this from today onward. Perhaps your first reaction is to think, when I feel it with more intensity. But the Bible does not point to the intensity, but rather to the direction. The problem is not in the desire appearing, but in what you do with it after it arrives. In Matthew 5 verse 28, Jesus said something very profound. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Do you see? He is not talking about the first impulse, but about the decision to feed that within the heart. And here is something very important, especially for those who are over 65. In this phase of life, sin often does not happen in visible actions, but in silent thoughts, repeated, cultivated over time. Perhaps you are alone at home, remembering, imagining, reliving scenes, or even creating new ones within your mind. And, little by little, that begins to occupy more space than it should, taking away your peace, distancing you from the presence of God. It is not the feeling, it is the remaining there. And do you know why this weighs so heavily on your heart? Because you have a sensitive conscience formed over years with God. And when something starts to get out of place, even in silence, you feel it. But there is also another reason that almost no one talks about. Many Christians of your generation grew up hearing very little about this type of subject. And when they did hear, it was almost always with a tone of prohibition, of shame, of something that should be erased over time. So, when desire appears after the loss, a strange sensation comes along. At my age, this shouldn't exist anymore. But does this idea come from God, or from an incomplete way of understanding what holiness is? If this word is speaking to your heart, leave an amen here in the comments. Perhaps other people, in the same phase of life, also need to find this clarity. But there is still a very delicate situation that needs to be handled with care, and it may be exactly at the center of what you feel today. That is what we will talk about now. And what if this desire that appears in you is connected to the person you loved for so many years? Perhaps you are not thinking about someone new. Perhaps there is no interest in another relationship. But even so, your mind goes back to the one who has departed. Memories arise, moments lived, affection, intimacy, even the touch, and, in some instance, this can come accompanied by desire. And then the doubt appears with force. Is this wrong? Am I disrespecting the one I loved? Is this a sin before God? But let us be calm, because this is an area that needs truth and also a lot of grace. Feeling, longing, remembering moments, even feeling your body react to these memories is not, in itself, a sin. This is part of a story that was real, of a covenant that was lived with love and that left deep marks on you. In Romans 12:15, it is written, "Mourn with those who mourn." God does not ignore your process. He does not treat your pain as something that needs to be erased quickly. But here, there is a point of attention. When the memory ceases to be a memory and becomes a place where you hold on, where your mind starts to return repeatedly, feeding images, sensations, creating a refuge that replaces reality. Do you see the difference? It is not about remembering, it is about remaining there, feeding on that, to the point where it starts to dominate your thoughts and emotions. If you feel like you need help to walk through this season with God, I've left a resource in the first pinned comment that can guide you more deeply. It may be exactly what you need right now. Now tell me, do you feel that these memories bring you peace, or have they trapped you more than freed you? Because what we will see next will show you how to deal with this in a practical way, without guilt and without drifting away from God. So the question now stops being, is this a sin or not, and becomes, how do I deal with this in a way that honors God? And here is something very important for you who are over 65 and have a walk with God. God does not expect perfection. He expects direction. In 1 Corinthians 6, verse 12, it is written, "I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I will not be mastered by anything." The central point is not just what is permitted, but what begins to dominate your heart, your mind, and your peace. So, when desire arises, and it may arise, you do not need to enter into despair or condemn yourself. You can learn to respond differently. First, acknowledge with sincerity, "Lord, this is here," without a mask, without shame, without running away. Second, surrender. "I do not want this to distance me from you. Help me to deal with this." Third, redirect with wisdom. Change the focus of your mind. Get up, walk around the house, open the Bible, put on some worship music, occupy your heart with something that brings life. This is not weakness. This is spiritual maturity, because the struggle is not in the fact of feeling, but in letting that grow without direction. And perhaps, in this phase of life, the biggest challenge is not the desire itself, but the loneliness that creates space for it to grow. And here is an important question. Have you been taking care only of what you feel, or also of the emptiness that remains? If this word is helping you in any way so far, like this video. This can take this message to someone who is also struggling in silence, in this same phase of life. Also take the opportunity to subscribe to our channel. And there is still an essential step that many ignore and that can completely transform the way you live this phase from now on. You were not called only to resist desire. You were called to redirect your life. Because, over the years, especially after loss, it is natural for some areas to become empty. The routine changes, the silence increases, and the heart feels. And when this space is not cared for, desire ends up occupying a larger place than it should. So perhaps the most important question is not, how do I stop feeling? But rather, what am I doing with the life that God still gave me? In Colossians 3, verse 2, it is written, "Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." This does not mean ignoring reality, but consciously choosing where you will place your attention. your time, your heart. Perhaps it is time to resume things that were left behind, to draw closer to the Word, to get involved with other people, even if little by little. To get out of the routine of isolation that often intensifies these feelings. And there is something that many are afraid to think about, but that needs to be said with respect and care. Your story is not over. Some, after 65, feel guilty just considering the possibility of a new companionship, as if that would dishonor the past. But the Bible does not condemn a new beginning. On the contrary, it shows that God continues writing the story while there is life. This is not an obligation, nor pressure, but it also does not need to be a taboo. The most important thing is, you were not called to live trapped in the past, nor dominated by what you feel, but guided by God in the present. And tell me, have you allowed God to lead this new phase? Or have you been trying to go through all of this alone? Because there is still a powerful promise that can bring rest to your heart today. Perhaps, deep down, what weighs most is not just the desire, but the fear of displeasing God in this phase of life. After everything you have built, after a whole journey with faith, the last thing you want is to drift away from His presence now. And this concern alone already reveals something very beautiful. Your heart still desires to please God, and God sees that. In Psalms 92 verse 14 it is written, "They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green." Do you see? God does not see this phase as an end, but as a continuation. There is still life. There is still purpose. There is still spiritual growth. This means you do not need to live in fear of what you feel, but you can learn to live with God within what you feel. The desire may arise, the memory may appear, the longing may even tighten, but none of this has the power to separate you from God unless you choose to walk away. Romans 8 verse 38 reminds us that nothing can separate us from the love of God, not phases of life, not emotions, and not internal struggles. So, instead of living accusing yourself, you can live drawing closer. Instead of hiding, you can open your heart. Instead of carrying guilt, you can walk with awareness and peace. And perhaps today, God is showing you that holiness is not in not feeling, but in choosing every day to remain close to Him, even while feeling. Are you willing to live this phase with more lightness, trusting that God is still taking care of you? Because when you understand this, something changes inside you. And that is exactly what I want to remind you of now, in the conclusion of this moment together. Perhaps you have carried in silence the doubt, just by feeling this, am I already sinning? But today it became clear, in the light of the Word, feeling is not a sin. What God looks at is the path you choose to follow from there. What you feel does not distance you from God. What brings you closer is how you respond to it. And more than desire, often there is longing, absence, a story that still lives inside you, and God does not ignore this. He cares. So, instead of living with guilt, you can live with awareness. Instead of hiding, you can draw closer. Instead of fighting alone, you can walk with God. If this word spoke to you, leave a comment and share it with someone who also needs this peace. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel, Ageless Souls, to continue receiving our messages. And never forget, God does not reject you for what you feel. He welcomes you and teaches you to live with Him in every phase of life.